The rain poured heavily outside, washing over the streets of the small city. Cars splashed past, and people rushed with umbrellas, their faces buried in their coats. But inside the restaurant, the world was warm. The air smelled of fried eggs, fresh bread, and strong coffee. The soft clatter of plates and quiet talk filled the room. At a corner table, two women laughed over pancakes. A man read the newspaper by the window. Waitresses moved quickly, balancing trays with ease. Then the door creaked open. A gust of cold wind rushed in, and every head turned for a moment. A man stood at the entrance, old, soaked from head to toe. His coat was thin and torn, dripping water onto the clean floor. His hair, grey and flat against his forehead, stuck to his face. His shoes were muddy, his steps slow. He looked around shyly, not meeting anyone's eyes, and walked quietly to the counter. Behind the counter stood Ben, the young cashier. His shirt was neatly tucked in, and he wore a name tag that read Supervisor in Training. The old man spoke gently. "Please, may I have a plate of food?" Ben rolled his eyes and tapped the screen in front of him. "What kind of food?" "Anything warm," the man said. "Even just rice and sauce is fine." Ben tapped a few buttons, then said, "That'll be 2,000. The old man reached into his pocket, then the other one. His fingers shook as he searched deeper. His face slowly changed, first confused, then worried. Finally, he looked up with shame in his eyes. I must have left my wallet at home," he said. "I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to waste your time. I just thought maybe I could eat and come back to pay later. Or maybe just sit here until the rain stops." Ben laughed sharply, loud enough for others to hear. "This is not a refugee camp where they serve free food," he said. People nearby turned to look. A young man at a booth chuckled. Two girls behind him whispered, covering their mouths. "If you don't have money," Ben said louder, "you don't get food. It's that simple." The old man stepped back slowly. His shoulders dropped. His eyes stared down at the floor. No one said anything. No one helped. As he turned to walk back out into the rain, his coat clung to him like a wet rag. He looked smaller now, like the world had pushed him down. And no one cared. But someone was watching, and she was about to do something that would change everything. From across the room, Sarah, a young waitress, had seen everything. She stood near a corner table, holding an empty tray. Her black shoes were worn at the toes, and her simple uniform clung to her from moving back and forth all morning. She was only 25, but the dark circles under her eyes made her look older. Life had not been easy for her, but she always managed a warm smile. Now, that smile was gone. Her eyes were fixed on the door where the old man stood, tired, wet, and embarrassed. Sarah's chest tightened. She saw how people looked at him with laughter, with judgment, like he didn't belong. And she remembered what it felt like, to be treated like that. She took a deep breath, walked to the counter, and placed her tray down with a soft thud. Then she reached into her pocket. It was all she had left from her tips this week. She unfolded 2 worn 1,000 notes and placed them firmly on the counter. "I'll pay for his food," she said clearly, her voice calm but strong. Ben looked up, confused. "Sarah, are you serious? You don't have to." "I said I'll pay," she repeated, cutting him off. He asked for food, not pity. A few people laughed from their seats. "How sweet," someone mocked. "Maybe she thinks he'll give her a big reward." Waitress playing the hero. Sarah turned around slowly. Her face was quiet, but her eyes burned. "Kindness isn't a joke," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "If helping someone makes you laugh, maybe you're the one who's poor, inside." The restaurant went still. No one spoke. Ben sighed and shrugged. "Fine. 1 plate of rice and sauce coming up." Sarah looked over at the old man. His lips were slightly open. His eyes were shiny, like he was holding back tears. She walked to him gently and smiled. "Please, come sit down," she said softly. "I'll bring it to you." The old man nodded slowly. "Thank you," he whispered. He found a quiet seat by the window. Rain still slid down the glass, but inside the world was a little warmer because someone chose to care. Sarah went to the kitchen and picked up the plate herself. Then, with quiet hands and a kind heart, she served him like he was the most important person in the room. And in that moment, to someone who had nothing, she truly was a light. The rain had stopped by the time the old man left. He had eaten slowly, quietly, and thanked Sarah with his eyes more than his words. When he stood to go, he placed a hand over his heart, nodded to her, and walked out into the wet street. No one else clapped. No one else cared. But Sarah felt something heavy and soft in her chest, like peace, mixed with sadness. The rest of her shift passed in silence. No one spoke to her. The customers looked at her differently now. Some smiled awkwardly, others just looked away. When the last table was cleared, Sarah wiped her hands and walked to clock out. But before she could press the button, she heard her name. Sarah. Office. Now. It was Mr. Bryan, the manager. He stood in the doorway to his office, arms crossed, face like stone. Sarah followed him inside. The office was small and smelled of burnt coffee and old cleaning spray. Papers were stacked on every surface. A clock ticked loudly on the wall. Close the door, he said. She did. Then he turned to face her, not angry, but annoyed. This is a business, Sarah, he said slowly, like talking to a child. Not your charity project. Sarah kept her eyes on his, calm. I paid for it myself, she replied gently. That's not the point, Bryan snapped. People were whispering, laughing. Do you think we're here to rescue every beggar who walks in? Sarah said nothing. You embarrassed this place, he added. Don't test me again. There was a pause. Can I go now? She asked quietly. He stared at her, then nodded. Get out, and next time, remember your place. Sarah left the office without a word. As she walked past the kitchen, she saw Marcy and Josh leaning near the sink. They stopped talking when she entered. She kept walking. Just as she passed, Marcy whispered loud enough for her to hear. Must be nice. Acting like a saint, our own Mother Teresa. Josh chuckled. Bet she thinks that guy was a secret millionaire. Like some movie. Sarah didn't reply. She picked up her coat, signed her name on the timesheet, and walked out into the night. The air outside smelled like wet pavement and leftover smoke. Her shoes made soft splashes in puddles as she walked home alone. She didn't feel strong, or brave, or special. She just felt tired. But deep inside she knew, even if no one clapped, no one cheered, she did the right thing, and that was enough. The walk home was slow. The rain had started again, soft and steady. Drops slid down Sarah's face, but she didn't bother to wipe them. Her coat wasn't thick, and the cold sank through it easily. She held it tight around her chest as cars passed, splashing water at her feet. She turned down a quiet street, past a broken streetlight and a small shop that had closed early. At the end of the road stood a tired old building with cracked walls and peeling paint. She climbed the narrow stairs to the third floor, every step creaking under her shoes. Room 3B. She unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside. The apartment was small, just one room and a kitchen. The walls were stained. The single window let in a cold draft that made the curtains move slightly. A kettle sat on the stove, silent. The only real warmth came from a tiny lamp near the bed. On the couch, curled under a blanket, was Lily, her younger sister. Lily was just 17, skinny and pale, her face tired with sickness. She had a deep cough that had been getting worse. When the door closed, Lily stirred and opened her eyes halfway. You're late, she murmured. Sarah smiled softly and dropped her bag near the wall. Got caught in the rain. She went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out a small bowl of cold porridge, the same one they hadn't finished yesterday. She reheated it on the stove, added a pinch of salt, and stirred slowly. Then she brought it to Lily. Lily sat up slowly and took the bowl with both hands. Thanks, she whispered. Sarah nodded, then sat at the edge of the bed and watched her eat. After a while she stood, opened her wallet, and looked inside. 3,000, that was all. 3 crumpled 1,000 notes. 1 faded photo of their late mother. 1 small prayer card. Nothing else. She stared at the money for a moment. Her heart sank a little, but she didn't regret what she had done. She folded the money neatly, put it back inside, and placed the wallet beside her pillow. Lily was already lying back down, bowl empty, her breath slow and tired. Sarah turned off the lamp, pulled a second blanket over her sister, and sat by the window. Her reflection looked back at her, tired, thin, and quiet, but not broken. She whispered to the dark room, more to herself than anyone else. Better to go to sleep hungry than to walk past someone who is. Her sister, Lily, lay asleep, her breathing slow and soft under the old blanket. But Sarah's eyes stayed open. She wasn't thinking about the diner anymore. Not Ben, not Marcy, not even Mr. Bryan. Her mind had drifted far back to a day she never forgot. She must have been about 10 years old. The market was full that afternoon. Voices loud, traders shouting, people walking fast with their bags and baskets. She held tightly to her mother's hand as they walked between stalls, buying a little beans, some pepper, and a piece of fish. It wasn't much, but her mother always made it enough. Then suddenly her mother stopped. She had looked dizzy. Her lips were dry. Her hand slipped from Sarah's fingers, and before Sarah could speak, she collapsed, right there in the middle of the street. People screamed. Some moved around them, others just stared. But no one stopped. Not one person helped. Sarah knelt beside her mother, shaking her, crying, begging her to wake up. The ground was hot, the sun was sharp, and the crowd just passed by. She remembered the smell of dust and sweat, and then a voice, soft, old, kind. "Child, don't cry. I'm here." Sarah looked up and saw an old woman in a faded wrapper. Her slippers were worn and her hands were rough. She didn't have much, maybe nothing at all, but she knelt beside them. She gave Sarah a small bottle of water. She placed a thin shawl over her mother's chest and wiped her face with a torn piece of cloth. She stayed there until Sarah's mother opened her eyes. She stayed until Sarah stopped shaking. And then, without asking for thanks or attention, she stood up and disappeared into the crowd. Sarah never saw her again. She never knew her name, but that woman's face, her soft eyes, her cracked hands, stayed in Sarah's heart forever. And from that day on, Sarah made a promise. Whenever she saw someone left out, laughed at, pushed aside, she would not walk away. She would stop. She would help. She would be the one who stayed. Now, sitting in the cold apartment with nothing but 3,000 naira and a sick sister sleeping behind her, Sarah placed her hand on the window pane. "I hope you're still out there," she whispered, thinking of the old woman. "Because I'm still keeping your promise." And then she closed her eyes, not with pain, not with regret, but with peace. The days passed slowly. At the restaurant, the whispering didn't stop, not right away. People still stared. Customers who had laughed during the old man's visit now avoided Sarah's eyes. Some of the waitresses giggled behind her back. "Here comes Mother Teresa," Marcy would say, loud enough for her to hear. Josh would pretend to collect coins from the counter. Maybe she's building her own charity. But Sarah didn't reply. She didn't need to. She just kept wiping tables, serving food, and doing her job. Over time, the noise faded. The laughter grew less frequent. The comments died down. The stares didn't last as long. And then, one quiet morning, as Sarah was clearing a corner table, she didn't look up at first. The restaurant was calm, filled with the usual clinking of spoons and light chatter. But something shifted in the room. The air changed, not in volume, but in attention. She glanced toward the entrance, her breath caught. It was him. The same old man who had come in, wet and ashamed, but he looked nothing like before. This time he wore a clean charcoal suit, perfectly ironed. His grey hair was neatly combed back. His shoes were shiny, his posture strong. People turned to look at him, not with laughter, but with curiosity. He walked in slowly, calmly, his eyes scanning the restaurant until they landed on Sarah. He smiled. Sarah stared, stunned, but something in his eyes told her it was really him. The same eyes she had met when he had no food and no pride. He walked up to her and said softly, "You didn't know me. You had nothing to gain, but you helped anyway." Sarah blinked, her mouth slightly open. You look so different." He gave a small laugh. "I get that a lot." They sat at an empty table by the window. The same window where he had once watched the rain slide down in silence. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah told him everything. About her mother fainting in the market. About the old woman who had helped them. About the promise she made to always stop when others walked away. The man listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at her with something deep in his eyes. Not pity, not admiration, something softer, Very few people, he said quietly, have made me feel like a human. Sarah didn't know what to say. She only nodded, her chest rising and falling with something she couldn't quite name. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. The next afternoon, Sarah was folding napkins near the back of the diner when the manager, Mr. Bryan, called out from the front. "Sarah, something came for you." She walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. Mr. Bryan held out a small white envelope, looking confused. A delivery man dropped it off, said it was urgent. Sarah took the envelope carefully. It was thick, with her name written in neat handwriting. Miss Sarah Williams. She flipped it open and pulled out a folded card. Inside was a short message, simple, clear, and strange. "Dear Sarah, if your heart leads you, meet me tomorrow at 4 p.m. Grand Oak Cafe. Mr. Thomas Evans." Sarah stared at the words. Thomas Evans. She hadn't asked his name when they spoke the day before. He hadn't given it. But somehow, the moment she read it, she knew it was him, the old man. That night, she barely slept. She stood in front of the small mirror in their room, brushing her hair and trying on her only nice blouse, a soft cream one she had worn to church a year ago. Her shoes were plain but clean. She borrowed Lily's earrings and tried to smile, though her hands kept shaking. The next day, she stood outside the Grand Oak Cafe looking up. It was tall, shiny, the kind of place where people wore suits and didn't look down when they walked past you. Sarah had passed it many times before, always on her way to somewhere more ordinary. But now she walked in. The lobby smelled like flowers and fresh leather. The floors sparkled. The elevator had gold buttons and soft music playing inside. Her heart thudded in her chest as she approached. When she finally arrived at her destination, Mr. Thomas Evans stood there. But this wasn't the man from the restaurant, and not even the one in the charcoal suit. This version of him looked complete, calm, confident. His clothes were perfect, his smile gentle, but his eyes, those kind eyes, were the same. "Thank you for coming," he said, stepping aside. Sarah entered the quiet, elegant cafe. Large windows showed the city skyline. A small table near the corner held 2 cups of tea. They sat. "I wanted to tell you in person," he began, "because anything else would feel wrong." She waited. "My real name is Thomas Evans," he said. "I own a company that works in 12 countries. We build schools, hospitals, roads, things that help people." Sarah's eyebrows lifted, speechless. "That day," he continued, "I dressed the way I did on purpose. I left my wallet at home on purpose. I wanted to see something real." He looked at her with warmth. "I didn't expect anything. I didn't ask for anything. I just watched. And what I saw was you." Sarah looked down, her heart racing. She couldn't tell if she felt honored, confused, or scared. "I saw someone who gave freely, when there was nothing to gain. And I haven't stopped thinking about that moment since." Sarah looked up. Her voice was small. "Why me?" He smiled gently. "Because sometimes the people with the least carry the most light." And in that beautiful quiet room above the city, Sarah's life began to change, not because of riches or power, but because someone saw her heart and it mattered. She sat quietly. Her fingers rested around the warm teacup, but she wasn't drinking. Her thoughts were loud, spinning too fast. She looked at Mr. Thomas, then at the soft city lights outside the window. Everything felt too big, too different from her small world. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know what to feel," she said softly. "One part of me feels honored, but another part feels like maybe I was being tested, like a trick." Thomas didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes gentle. "I understand that," he said. "Truly I do." Sarah shook her head slowly. It feels strange. Like I was pulled into something I didn't ask for." He nodded. "You're right. It is strange. But I didn't plan to pull you in. I only watched. You chose to help. I did nothing." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw no pride in his face, no smugness, just truth. "I didn't expect anything," he continued. "I've met many people, rich ones, smart ones, even powerful ones, but very few make you feel human again." He paused. "I'm getting old, Sarah. I don't have a wife, no children. Most of the people around me are either paid to smile or too afraid to be honest." His voice became quieter. I've built schools, hospitals, and companies, but I've never had someone sit across from me and care, not for what I own, not for my name. Sarah's chest tightened. She glanced at her hands. So why bring me here? She asked. He smiled. Because I'd like to know you better. And if you're willing, I'd like you to spend some time with me, not as a helper, not as a student, just as someone I can trust. He took a deep breath. I visit many places, villages, shelters, and food kitchens. I give, but I also listen. Sometimes I just need someone by my side who sees the world the same way I do. Sarah looked down, her mind full of memories. Her mother in the market, the woman with the shawl, the old man at the counter with wet shoes and empty pockets. This wasn't about wealth. It never had been. She looked up. I don't have fancy clothes, she said, or perfect words. You have something better, Thomas replied. You have heart. A quiet filled the room. Sarah nodded slowly. She wasn't chasing money. She wasn't dreaming of gifts. But there was something here, something honest, something she didn't want to walk away from. I'll come, she said, if you really mean it. Thomas smiled wider than before. Not the smile of a rich man pleased with a deal, but of a man who had just been given a rare gift. I really do. And so, with no promises, no contracts, and no idea what tomorrow would bring, Sarah said yes. Not because she wanted more, but because something in her heart whispered, this is what you were made for. The next few weeks felt like stepping into another world. Sarah had never traveled far before. Her life had always been the same, the tiny apartment and quiet nights caring for Lily. But now, she found herself waking up in quiet villages, dusty towns and modest shelters, riding in the back of Mr. Thomas's old blue Jeep with the windows down and wind in her hair. There were no bodyguards, no press, no luxury. Just him, her, and the road. They visited community kitchens, where children with tired eyes lined up for food. They helped stack boxes at food drives and cleaned small clinics that had no power, but a lot of heart. Sarah often wondered how someone like Thomas, who could stay in palaces, chose to sleep in places with no hot water and thin mattresses. But he never complained. He never introduced himself as Mr. Thomas Evans the billionaire. He never mentioned his company. He never corrected people when they called him sir or uncle. Instead, he asked for their names. He listened. He laughed with them. One afternoon, while sorting supplies in a dusty schoolroom, Sarah finally asked, "Why don't you tell people who you are?" Thomas looked up from the books he was arranging. "Because," he said softly, "they'd stop talking to me like I'm human." Sarah understood. And over time, she saw more than just the kind man who bought canned goods and donated money. She saw how deep his silence was, how he carried stories in his eyes, and how he looked at each person as if they mattered. He treated everyone with the same quiet respect, from a child with dirty feet to an old woman with no teeth and a tired laugh. And he treated her the same way. Never once did he treat her like a project or a rescue. He didn't ask her to impress him. He didn't expect her to change. He simply let her be Sarah, and that's what made their connection grow. Not romance, not attraction, but something deeper: trust, respect, peace. At night, when the day's work was done, they often sat outside under the stars. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. One evening, after they finished repainting the walls of a women's shelter in a small town, Thomas leaned back in his chair and looked up at the sky. "I've had people offer me everything," he said. "Comfort, power, even love." He paused. "But what I needed was someone who understands why I love the things I do. Someone who doesn't need to be dazzled, just present." Sarah didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked at him. And in the quiet, something passed between them, a gentle knowing. Two people, years apart, shaped by pain, choosing kindness instead of bitterness. They didn't hold hands. They didn't lean close. But somehow, in that space between their chairs, they were not alone. And that was enough. It had been nearly 2 months since Sarah first left the restaurant. She had walked away with nothing but a borrowed blouse and a heart full of questions. Now she stood in front of a small, clean building in the middle of a quiet neighborhood. The sign above the door read, "Sarah's Table, a place where everyone deserves a warm meal." She blinked, trying to hold back the tears forming in her eyes. The building wasn't very luxurious. It wasn't big, but it was beautiful. Not because of the paint or the shelves or the soft chairs inside, but because of what it stood for. Mr. Thomas stood beside her, smiling. He handed her a folder. Inside were the papers. Ownership, funding, staff, food supply, all taken care of. "I built this," he said gently, "because of you." Sarah shook her head slowly. "But I didn't do anything." "Yes," he replied. "You did. You paid for one meal, with the last 2,000 you had. And because of that small act of kindness, hundreds of people will eat here every week, in dignity, not shame." Her throat tightened. She couldn't speak. "This isn't charity," Thomas continued. "This is a mirror of your heart. A place where no one gets mocked for needing help. Where no one is asked to prove their worth before getting a plate." Sarah placed her hand on the sign. Her name written in bold. She had never imagined this, not in her wildest dreams. Later that week, the center had its soft opening. People from the community came, mothers, children, old men, students with empty pockets, each one served with respect. And word spread. It didn't take long for some familiar faces to show up. Ben, the cashier, Marcy and Josh, her old co-workers, even Mr. Brian, the manager from the restaurant. They didn't come for food. They came because they had heard. They stood quietly by the door, not mocking, not laughing, just watching. When Ben read the words "Sarah's table," his face fell, and when he saw Sarah standing beside the serving counter, wearing a clean apron, gently handing food to a boy who hadn't eaten in 2 days, he looked down at his shoes. Marcy whispered, "Is this really her?" Josh didn't reply. Mr. Bryan cleared his throat and said, almost too softly, "She was always different." But Sarah didn't gloat. She didn't turn them away. She simply smiled, just like she always had, and kept serving. Because now it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving that kindness wins. Not loudly, not quickly, but always, and deep in her heart, Sarah knew. That small money she gave at the diner, it didn't just pay for one man's food. It built a table where the forgotten could finally sit. Years passed. Seasons came and went like quiet waves. The small community kitchen named Sarah's Table grew. Volunteers came in from all over. The line outside the door got longer, but so did the smiles inside. Sarah kept working, not as a boss, not as a hero, but as someone who understood. And Mr. Thomas? He remained by her side for as long as time would allow. They visited more villages together, held hands with children who had no shoes, shared quiet nights over rice and stories. He never changed. He still wore simple clothes, still listened more than he spoke, still let the world think he was just another kind old man. Then, one morning, he was gone. He passed quietly in his sleep. No pain, no fear, just peace. Sarah got the call while folding clothes at the shelter. She didn't cry right away. She just sat still, staring at the sky. Later that week, a lawyer visited her. He brought a letter. It had only one sentence. "If kindness ever deserved a reward, then let this be yours. I know it's in the right hands." Thomas Evans? Sarah blinked, speechless. He had left everything to her. His houses, his shares, his company. She didn't understand it at first. She didn't know what to do, but slowly, carefully, she found her way. She didn't spend it on dresses, diamonds, or private jets. She bought a building in the heart of the city, the same city where she once wiped tables and was laughed at for paying for a stranger's food. She opened a restaurant. Not just any restaurant, a place called The First Plate. The sign at the front was simple yet powerful. Motto: no one should have to earn kindness. There were no price tags on the menu, no cash register at the door. People gave what they could. And if they couldn't give, they still ate. Full meals, warm tea, gentle music, and smiles, always smiles. Sarah stood by the entrance every morning, just like Mr. Thomas once did, welcoming each person like family. Lily, now fully recovered and strong, ran the kitchen. Volunteers came from all over, students, retirees, even a few of her old co-workers who had once mocked her. They didn't ask for forgiveness, they just came and worked. And Sarah? She never forgot the diner, the rain, the man in the wet coat. Sometimes she'd sit by the window of The First Plate, watching the street. And whenever someone walked in, nervous, tired, unsure, She'd walk up to them, place a hand on their shoulder and say, "Welcome, you're right where you need to be." Because long ago, a stranger had walked into her life with nothing but empty pockets and tired eyes, and in choosing kindness she gained everything. And now, through her hands, that kindness would feed the world. One sunny afternoon, the restaurant was full, yet peaceful. Soft laughter echoed between tables. The kitchen clattered gently behind the counter. Volunteers moved with practiced grace, serving hot meals with warm smiles. Sarah stood near the wall, drying her hands. Above her, chalk dust still clung to the message written fresh that morning. Your first plate is on us. Your second, if you can, is on someone else. Simple, honest, true. It wasn't just a slogan. It was the soul of everything they'd built. She watched from the side as a new guest stepped in. A young boy, maybe 15. His clothes were worn, his eyes unsure. He hesitated at the doorway. One of the staff, without missing a beat, approached him with a plate and a smile. "No questions," the young man said kindly. "Just eat." The boy nodded, still silent, and took a seat by the window. Sarah's heart swelled, not with pride, but something gentler, something that felt like coming home. She walked slowly to the front of the room where a small mic stood by the piano. People turned as she began to speak. "We built this place on something simple," she said. "Not on money, not on titles, but on a moment that could have easily been forgotten." She paused, her voice steady but full. "I once paid for someone's meal, not knowing it would lead here, not knowing it would teach me what real giving feels like." Eyes in the room began to glisten. Some lowered their heads, others held their breath. "This isn't about the size of the act," she continued. "It's about the spirit behind it. Kindness doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be real, and most importantly, you shouldn't expect anything in return." She looked toward the window, where the boy now ate quietly, not rushed, not ashamed, because when kindness is real, it multiplies, quietly, faithfully, one plate at a time. She stepped down. No applause followed, just silence. A silence that said, "We understand." As she returned to her spot, Sarah took a slow breath, the kind that fills your lungs with peace. The boy looked up and caught her eye. He gave a small, unsure smile. She smiled back. And in that small exchange, in that brief second of recognition, Sarah felt it again. What Mr. Thomas had seen in her, what the world had once overlooked. That true kindness never disappears. It keeps moving hand to hand, plate to plate, heart to heart.